Welcome back to Inside Games, the only gaming news show brave enough to pretend to understand why Baldur's Gate 3 is blowing up.
Yeah, come on, Bruce. Tell me you don't know everyone wants to have sex with a bear without just telling me you don't know that everyone wants to have sex with a bear.
I mean, of course we all want to have sex with a bear, obviously. Baldur's Gate 3 is out here proving what we already knew, Lawrence. Everybody wants to get up in those bears' guts. Woo!
Yeah, oh, they were yearning, it turns out. Game is already climbing charts and topping a few, which isn't easy these days. We're only in August 2023, but it's already shaping up to be a really strong year for games. I think it's the best of all time, but that's just me.
I think there's a very strong argument for that too, Lawrence. We've had big releases like Street Fighter 6, Metroid Prime Remastered, Diablo 4, Final Fantasy 16, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and those are just to name a few of the video games that have come out this year.
The critical darling of all of those this far has been Tears of the Kingdom with an extremely impressive 96 on Metacritic.
Well deserved. But something I never thought would happen this year. We might have a new champion because Baldur's Gate 3 has currently topped Zelda with an even more impressive 97 Metascore on Metacritic. That makes it just barely the best reviewed game of 2023.
And probably one of the best of all time, right? It's got to be up there.
Definitely. Yeah, it's up there, yeah.
And Metacritic isn't the only chart that Baldur's Gate 3 is racing up. We'll go over that and everything else this game has going on after this quick word from our sponsor, World of Warships Legends.
Inside Games is brought to you by World of Warships Legends. World of Warships Legends is a massively multiplayer, free-to-play game for naval battle enthusiasts. You'll find lots of historically accurate ships, and of course, you can search and destroy your enemies with these powerful warships. There are destroyers, which are kind of like a glass cannon, which means they possess smaller health pools but are armed with deadly torpedoes. Then you got cruisers, which are better armored and armed, making them the well-rounded group. Battleships or floating fortresses that can dispose of smaller adversaries with a single salvo. But if you miss, it's going to take a long time to fire again, and then you're going to get hit a bunch. And then there are aircraft carriers, which actually utilize aircraft to control the digital airspace. Get out into the water with over 8 million players, over 400 ships, 20 maps, hundreds of commanders. There's just no end to the content in World of Warships Legends. Now, there's a special bonus code for our Xbox players. It's 23 Xbox Legends. That'll provide 3 days of a premium account, 5 common crates, 5 red, white, and blue camouflages, and 5 common battle boosters. Both new and existing players can actually use this code, and it'll be valid till August 31st. So please click that link in the description. Use our code for World of Warships Legends. Hey, thank you very much, World of Warships Legends, for sponsoring Inside Games.
Yeah, the latest installment in this, well, now very legendary series has been a smash hit with critics and fans. It could push Zelda aside for Game of the Year, which I didn't think would be possible.
I didn't either. It's also a sign that there's still a huge market for a Dungeons & Dragons based RPG.
Yeah, we still don't have exact sales numbers yet, and I'm really curious for that. I really want to see just what the scale of the success is. But we do have some. Larian Studios previously said that 2.5 million copies of Baldur's Gate 3 were sold during its early access period.
And that was done in the past 3 years. And obviously has certainly shot up since the full release of the game, because a lot of people are playing it, especially on PC. Obviously, it's the only place to play it right now.
Over on Steam, it hit an all-time peak of more than 814,000 concurrent players, putting it behind only Hogwarts Legacy for the entire year so far. Hogwarts Legacy hit 879,000, so it's actually really close.
Man, geez. It's a great reception for a truly massive video game. Baldur's Gate took 6 years to develop, Baldur's Gate 3, which makes sense considering it has 174 hours of cutscenes and 17,000 possible ending variations.
And all the numbers we're seeing on the tail end of launch now just prove that players were really thirsting for a thick, hairy game like this.
The buzz around the game is driving up interest in the PlayStation 5 version, which releases early next month.
I love that, the ripple effects, yeah. Baldur's Gate 3 is currently the top pre-ordered game on the US PlayStation Network.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. It's nothing but sales and good news. We don't usually do that here on Inside Games. We're riding that bear penis all the way to the top.
The red rocket all the way to space.
Ugh.
Oh yeah, almost. Yeah. No, there's some gross parts to the release. There's some minor rough patches basically with the game right now.
Oh, okay. While the game is on Windows PC, it's not on Xbox consoles. A fact that some have attributed to the limitations of the Xbox Series S. Definitely a miss for Microsoft to not have one of the biggest multi-platforms of the year on your console.
Yeah, they keep missing some big ones. Ew.
Yep. Yeah, they do.
And what about an expansion? In a way, it's good that there's no battle pass or DLC. Not that you'd run out of things to do, but The first 2 Baldur's Gate games got expansions, so what's going on there?
Yeah, well, PC Gamer actually reports that the devs have not started on an expansion. They didn't rule it out either, though.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. It seems like they've really just dumped everything they had into this game, and that seems like it's how most people want the situation.
Yeah, Larian founder Sven Vink told PC Gamer that it would be, quote, very hard to make an expansion that takes players from level 12, which is Baldur's Gate 3's level cap, to level 20, which is Dungeons and Dragons level cap. Because in those upper levels, players start getting godlike powers, which, by the way, this sounds amazing, so make the expansion.
Yeah, it changes the nature of the game quite a bit. You basically get to do whatever you want, which I think a lot of people would probably want, especially after playing Baldur's Gate 3 and just getting wrecked by goblins and things. So
yeah, exactly.
So who knows at this point for the future of Baldur's Gate? I mean, they could just make another CRPG that's not necessarily a sequel or continuation. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that's true. Meanwhile, though, there's been some controversy around the game with some translators not getting mentioned in the credits of the game. Hopefully that'll be patched because people definitely deserve credit for their work.
Yeah, everybody's kind of rallying behind that, which is good to see. You also can't become suddenly popular without kicking up a few clouds of discourse, and this is kind of where most of the interest is, I guess. We've read a few interesting reactions out there on the internet to the explosive success of the game, ranging from indignation that other releases aren't so polished or content-filled, to the other side of it, which I find really fascinating, just worrying that this game will set a really unrealistic standard of what to expect in a retail game.
It has been an incredibly smooth launch for Baldur's Gate 3, tons of enthusiastic players, and well-earned commercial success. So all around golf claps for Larian. Great job.
Yeah, it's a situation where the right thing happened. You know, they made a game with a ton of content that was very content rich and interesting mechanics, player authored story and all that. And people are buying it for a change, so it's great.
But this is games media. We got to do our discourse duty, Lawrence. What do you personally think of the consequence of Baldur's Gate 3 will be? What do you think that consequence is going to be for this amazing release? Will game companies take all the wrong lessons from this? And what would those be?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concern, is that like this was a very small and darling genre, and very few developers, I think, were willing to undertake the monumental task of trying to make a game like this. So kind of since Dragon Age Origins, there's been some notable games in the meantime, but it's a game type that's been dormant for a long time, and I think there was a lot of pent-up desire for it. So because of that, I think if publishers see this and they're like, oh crap, we need to make more content-rich CRPGs, that's not a bad thing. I mean, assuredly, none of them will hit Baldur's Gate 3's scope. And I guess it's a shame to think about those games and how everybody's going to compare them to Baldur's Gate 3 and be upset. But still, it's an underserved genre. More games are a good thing. So what's the problem? I don't know. There's tons of games we already had a wave of games that imitated that style without actually being that, kind of facade games. Pretty much everything BioWare made after Dragon Age Origins, and Cyberpunk actually was kind of that sort of game. So I could see getting another rash of those kinds of games. I kind of like them, so that's not really a problem. And there's some existing games out there to play if you finish Baldur's Gate 3 somehow and want a ton more. I want to shout out Wasteland 3, Pillars of Eternity, Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, and of course Larian's previous game, Divinity Original Sin 2. Even Disco Elysium's kind of like that. So there's a stack to play through if Baldur's Gate 3 has woken you up and you want some good already out games, so you don't have to worry about ones that might come out in the future. Sorry, that was a lot. That was a lot. Bruce, what do you think?
No, that was great. I mean, Lawrence and I recorded a podcast. We talked about this very, very briefly. You'll see more of our discussion in that podcast. But this game was in early access for 3 years. So people don't know that. I had somebody in my chat just today being like, where did this release come from? I was like, this game's been out for 3 years. Playable for 3 years. And people were basically funding it in early access as Larian was making it better and better and better. That never happens. It's very rare that we get a giant full release like this that already had 3 years of early access and then probably another 3 years of actual development. So it's an interesting thing that people are like, developers, learn your lessons from Larian, because do they want all of their games in early access for 3 years getting improved, or do they want a real big release like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom? I'm not sure. We should give credit where credit is due, and that's to all the people that bought the game and played it and worked out a lot of bugs along with Larian.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. People like to. There's some early access exhaustion, I think, and crowdfunding exhaustion and stuff. This is the one example where it really worked out the best possible way. But we can't expect that they'll all be that smooth or all turn out that well.
No, not at all.
And you talk about the early access and like 3 years into early access, 3 more years of polishing to launch. That kind of tees up the other concern that a lot of people have, and I think even developers have been kind of scared about, is that Baldur's Gate 3 will set an unrealistic expectation in an era when theoretically we're trying to get devs to crunch less. But here's Baldur's Gate 3 with just mountains and mountains of content that's all like interlinked and interfunctional. So do you think, Bruce, that philosophically Baldur's Gate 3 is pushing the needle back the other way and potentially forcing devs to crunch to make tons of content to satisfy ever-increasing gamer appetites?
It's a really good question. Larian, I mean, obviously, I'm sure there was some crunch along the way or whatever from Larian, but again, going back to the early access period of this, they had years to work this out. I'm sure that they at some point came up with a date, and they're like, well, we'll hit this date for our full release. And, probably had to move a little bit, and kind of nobody cared, right? Like, it's on Steam, it's like, well, whatever, it'll come out eventually. Whereas if you got a Starfield or you got a Zelda or whatever, like, they've got to hit that date. So I do think this game makes expectations from gamers way too high, because this is one of the best video games probably of all time. I don't know that you can expect a $60 video game being the best video game of all time every time from a major release. I don't know that that's a thing. I'm sorry. So I wouldn't expect a game of this scale every time you pay for a AAA game.
Yeah, well said. I think... this is the libertarian gamer in me. I think the free market's going to sort that out,
Yeah.
Mostly because the market has continued to exist with Rockstar games in it. And they do this. They're able to do this. Blizzard Entertainment is another company. Like Diablo 4, not everybody can make that game because they don't have the time or the budget. So some companies do and can, and then they make loads and loads of money. So... but other games still exist and sell alongside those. It just means you have to get a little more careful with your release date, I think. So it's been a concern. I remember, like, when GTA 4 came out, everybody was like, oh, God, no game can be like that. How are we supposed to sell games next to that? The good news is that gamers should keep buying stuff. One thing I find interesting, and again, everything relates to Cyberpunk with me, is I think that's an example of standards being set at a certain place. I won't say too high. But Rockstar with GTA set the standard of that experience at a very high place, and Cyberpunk came in under that. And people, like to blame the marketing for being dishonest, but honestly, I think it was just people had a standard that they assumed the game would be. And when Cyberpunk wasn't that, people felt shortchanged because this kind of game is supposed to have these things in it. So I think we saw that play out, but it was Rockstar's legacy that led to it. So maybe 10 years from now, there will be another big CRPG that comes out that everyone will expect to be like Baldur's Gate 3 because that's the standard bearer at that point. It's really hard to imagine that, but maybe. So we've seen an example of that happening is basically what I'm saying. And it sucks, but I don't know that if it happens with one more company, I don't know that that's the end of the world.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. Hey, here are some patrons that support the Inside Games Patreon that allow us to make videos every single week. And these patrons, they don't want to have sex with a bear, which is lame, but that's because they're into wolves. They want to have sex with wolves. Sherwin Sanchez, Pitstrip, Loveless, and Aiden Foley.
Nice. I've got some patrons that don't want to have sex with bears either, because they are the bear. Scotty Ryan, Nick Calderon, Ray Pichardo, and Dan Halloran. Thank you very, very much. Hey, we make memes. Check this out. Fun meme for you right at the end of the video. Sign up for the Inside Games Patreon today and help us curate this art for you.